The bell tower had never failed. For as long as the villagers could remember, its iron tongue had struck the air at dawn, at midday, and at dusk, marking the rhythm of their days. Men straightened their backs in the fields when they heard it. Women pulled bread from ovens at its sound. Children stopped their play and counted the peals with their fingers, learning the hours long before they knew their letters. The bell was not simply a tool, it was a heartbeat. And when it rang, it reminded the people that their lives moved forward, orderly and certain, from hour to hour, season to season. But on that day, when the sun climbed high and the shadows lay shortest, the tower stood silent. The people paused at once, hands still on scythes, on kneading troughs, on water buckets. They lifted their heads toward the steeple, waiting. The bell rope hung still. The air carried no sound but the drone of insects and the rustle of leaves. 1 minute passed. Then another. The silence grew heavy. Mothers hushed their children. Old men frowned, shading their eyes against the sun. Never in living memory had the bell failed to sound at noon. And then, from inside the houses, a new sound rose. The clocks began to strike. One by one, in every cottage and hall, the clocks lifted their voices. Not 12 chimes, but 13. Deep and sharp, they rang out together as though the village itself had been thrown into confusion. Some were small and thin, some loud and sonorous, but all struck 13 times, their echoes overlapping, filling the streets with a clamor that felt wrong in the bones. The villagers stood frozen, listening. Dogs barked at the noise, roosters crowed in confusion. Children covered their ears, weeping. The sound rolled over the square like a storm, then fell away, leaving the village trembling in its absence. And when the last echo faded, the clocks all stopped. In every home, the pendulums froze, the hands fixed at the 13th strike. No winding, no shaking, no coaxing could bring them back to life. Time itself seemed to have slipped its track. The people gathered in the square, their faces pale. No one spoke of food or work now. They looked only at the bell tower, tall against the bright sky, its mouth sealed, its silence heavier than any sound. And though the sun still burned above them, noon felt farther away than it ever had before. The silence of the bell might have been endured, had it stood alone. But the silence of the clocks could not be ignored. That afternoon, when men returned to their cottages and women to their kitchens, each found the same thing: pendulum stiff, hands unmoving, the 13th strike frozen on every dial. Some tried winding their clocks. Others shook them, took them apart, polished gears and oiled hinges. The works were intact, the wheels turned, but once reassembled, the hands refused to move. It was the same in every house. At first, the villagers laughed uneasily. A trick of coincidence, they said. Perhaps the humidity had stopped the gears, perhaps the heat had warped the springs. But when night came and the sun sank below the fields, no chime marked the hour. Lamps were lit too early in some homes, too late in others. Supper was missed or burned. Children dozed at tables, then woke restless in the dark. By the second day, the village was out of rhythm. Mothers called children to school too soon, then too late. Men left for the fields in confusion, working long past weariness or returning while the sun still burned high. The old and sick suffered most, losing track of medicine, of meals, of rest. The air seemed stretched, strange, as though the hours had slipped loose from their moorings. The villagers began to watch the sky more closely, measuring shadows against walls, listening for the crow of the rooster, counting breaths between tasks. But it was never enough. Some swore the sun moved faster, others slower. Disagreements rose at the well, in the square, about when the day should begin and end. And always, above them, the bell tower stood mute. Its silence pressed into every corner of the village, heavier with each passing noon. By the third day, a quiet unease settled. People avoided speaking of the clocks, yet their eyes betrayed them, glancing again and again at the stopped hands, as if willing them forward. The frozen faces of the clocks became unbearable to look upon. Some covered them with cloth, others turned them to the wall. Yet even hidden, the villagers felt them, waiting, accusing, stuck forever in that 13th hour. It was then the thought first crept, unspoken but shared: perhaps it was not the clocks that had stopped, but time itself. At first, the villagers tried to live by the sun. They told themselves it would be simple. The bell was silent, the clocks were broken, but the heavens had not changed. Dawn would bring work, dusk would bring rest, and noon would shine brightest at the sky's peak. They would live as their ancestors once had, before bells and pendulums measured the day. But they soon discovered how much had been lost. Meals went wrong. Bread was taken from ovens too early or too late, stews boiled dry, milk soured in the pail. Children were sent to lessons while the fields were still silver with dew, or kept home until the sun already burned high. Men swung their scythes long into the fading light, only to discover they had missed supper, or had worked themselves faint in heat that should have been broken hours before. Night brought no order. Without the striking of the tower to divide evening from midnight, lamps were lit at strange times, some families falling asleep too soon, others wandering restless until dawn. Children woke in confusion, asking if it was morning when it was not, refusing to rise when it was. The rooster crowed, but no one agreed whether it marked day or night. Arguments sharpened. One man swore it was time to sow, while his neighbor insisted the hour was too early. Women quarreled at the well, accusing one another of sloth or haste. Work faltered, the rhythm of the fields broken. The elderly suffered worst. They had lived their whole lives by the bell and the clocks, and now their days stretched too long, or collapsed too short. Some wandered the lanes in the dark, muttering that the night had no end. Others wept when meals were missed, unable to tell if they were late or early, or if such words even meant anything anymore. And always the stopped clocks loomed, silent witnesses in every cottage. Their hands frozen on the 13th strike, they seemed to mock the villagers' struggle. Some smashed theirs in anger, only to regret it, as though destroying them cut away the last thread tying them to order. Others guarded theirs jealously, winding them even though they did not move, whispering that perhaps, if cared for, they would one day begin again. The days passed strangely, without measure. A morning might feel endless, an afternoon fleeting. Some swore the nights were longer than before, others that they had shortened. Disputes grew so fierce that whole families stopped speaking, unwilling to agree what hour it was. It was then the first words of dread began to spread, that the village had slipped from the world's time, and could not return. As the days lost their shape, so too did the village. At first, people had whispered only of confusion, but soon the whispers sharpened into blame. Some gathered in the church, kneeling in silence, saying the silence of the bell was no accident but a sign. God has withdrawn his hand, they said. We have sinned, and the 13th strike is his warning. They prayed for forgiveness, their voices hoarse, refusing to lift their eyes to the tower. Others scoffed. It is not heaven that broke our hours, they muttered, but the rope-keeper's negligence. Suspicion turned toward the bell ringer, who swore he had pulled the cord at noon, had felt it strain in his palms, yet no sound had come. His neighbors hissed at him in the square, spitting at his feet. Some called him cursed, others a liar. He withdrew to his cottage, shutters barred, his wife weeping at the door. Another faction claimed no man nor God was to blame. It is only misfortune, they insisted, a crack in the bell, a quirk of the clocks. They tried to live as before, marking hours by sun and shadow, but even among them quarrels rose. For when one said it was morning, another swore it was noon. When one said it was time to eat, another said it was time to sleep. The divisions cut deeper with every passing day. Families began to argue across their thresholds. Brothers stopped working side by side in the fields. At the well, women pulled their pails without speaking, their silence sharper than quarrels. The tavern, once loud with laughter, grew hushed, men glaring over mugs, measuring one another with eyes full of suspicion. And still, the bell tower loomed over them all. Its silence seemed to choose no side, yet every heart felt judged beneath its shadow. Some dared not look at it, crossing themselves as they passed. Others stood staring upward, as though daring it to answer. But it never did. When the sun reached its peak each day, all work faltered. The people froze, waiting, listening for the sound that never came. And though the air was empty, many swore they felt something then, a pressure, a weight in the chest, as though the silence itself had substance. The village no longer agreed on what had happened, or what should be done. But on one thing they were united: the day the bell had gone silent, time had broken. And each hour since had driven them farther apart. It was deep in autumn when the silence grew unbearable. The days felt stretched thin, the nights swollen and strange. People no longer trusted one another's words about time, they trusted even less their own senses. Children woke restless, unsure if it was dawn or dusk. Old men muttered that they felt younger when they rose and older when they lay down again, as though the hours were slipping across them unevenly. Then came the night of the echoes. The moon had climbed high above the fields, pale and sharp as bone. The streets lay empty, every door barred, every window shuttered. The village slept uneasily, some dozing in their chairs for fear of waking to wrong hours again. It began faintly, like a tremor in the air. A sound no louder than the stirring of a faraway bell. At first, each household thought it alone in hearing it, the father sitting up in the dark, the mother clutching her blanket tighter. But soon it swelled, until the whole village heard it at once. 13 strikes. Clear, heavy, measured, as if rung by a hand unseen. The people leapt from their beds. Mothers clutched children to their breasts, fathers lit lamps with shaking hands. Dogs howled, low and mournful, their voices carrying across the square. The cattle shifted in their stalls, stamping as though some predator circled them. The sound did not come from the tower, though its shape loomed in the dark. The bell rope hung still, the iron silent. And yet the chimes rolled out across the village, shaking the rafters, shuddering in the glass of windows, ringing through marrow and bone. 13 times it struck. Not 12, never 12. Always the 13th, carried heavy into the night. When the last note faded, silence returned so deep it seemed to smother breath itself. No one dared move. Children whimpered in the arms of their mothers. Old women whispered prayers, their voices cracking. Some men swore it was the bell of another place, another time, breaking into their own. Others said it was the echo of their lost hours, coming back to claim them. By dawn, the village was hollow-eyed. No one had slept. They gathered in the square in silence, their faces gray, their eyes fixed on the tower. The bell did not stir. The sun climbed, the shadows shifted, but no one could shake the sound from their ears. From that night forward, every man, woman, and child knew, the silence was no accident, no broken rope, no cracked gear. Time itself had turned against them. After the night of 13 echoes, the village no longer argued about whether the silence was chance or curse. None doubted now that something greater than them had taken hold. But knowing the truth did not ease the weight. It only deepened it. On the morning after, the elders were summoned to the square. They came slowly, bent with age, their steps careful on the stones. Their faces were grave, but not surprised. They had lived long enough to see patterns repeat, to hear stories whispered and dismissed, only to rise again. It was the oldest woman, Varvara, whose voice carried when the others faltered. She leaned on her stick, her hands thin and knotted like the roots of a tree. "This is not the first village to lose its hours," she said. The younger men stirred uneasily. The women drew their shawls tighter. Varvara told of a story her grandmother had carried, a tale from a place far beyond the river, spoken of in hushed tones and never written down. There had been another bell tower there, and it too had gone silent one day, its noon chime swallowed into nothing. The villagers thought little of it at first, but soon every clock in that place struck 13 before stopping forever, just as theirs had now. And what followed, she said, was worse. The people there lost their order. They no longer knew when to sow or reap, when to eat or rest. But worse still, they began to lose track of themselves. Some aged too quickly, their hair whitening within a season. Others lingered unnaturally, their bodies slow to fade though their eyes grew distant, as if they had lived too many years already. Neighbors could no longer agree on how old a man was, or how long a child had walked among them. Time, once shared, became fractured, each life slipping into its own rhythm. In the end, Varvara rasped, that village emptied. Some died, some wandered away, some simply vanished. Their bell tower still stands, they say, but it has no tongue. It watches the fields in silence, and no one dares live beneath its shadow. The square was still when she finished. Mothers clutched their children closer, fathers stared at the ground. Some muttered that it was only story, a tale meant to frighten the young. But no one truly believed that. The 13th strike still rang in their ears, too fresh to dismiss. The villagers looked up at their own tower. Its stone walls caught the morning light, its iron mouth gaping wide. It had not spoken for days, yet all felt it listening. And in that moment, the people of the village understood, they were no longer living in the order of the world. They had stepped into something else, something the elders had always feared but never named aloud.